As concern mounts over the scale of the unfolding humanitarian challenge currently facing Ukraine, UNICEF Regional Director Marie-Pierre Poirier made her first visit to the country in March in a bid to assess the needs of those affected by the conflict in East Ukraine. Poirier, who is responsible for the work of the UN's Child Support Wing UNICEF in Central and Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, visited the Donbas and met with displaced communities in Slovyansk and Kramatorsk. Upon her return to Kyiv, she spoke to Ukraine Today about the needs of the region and the importance of providing both material and psychological support for children whose lives have been turned upside down by exposure to the conflict. Marie-Pierre, thank you very much for finding the time to talk to us. It's a pleasure to meet you. Could you please begin by sharing with us some of your impressions from your recent trip to Slovyansk and Kramatorsk in the east of Ukraine?
Well, it was a very interesting trip. I got a chance to see really with my own eyes the impact of the situation on regular families and their children. One arrives in Kyiv and you really wonder what is going on in this country, is anything going on in the country. And you get to Kramatorsk and you see distribution centers run by volunteers where families come, mothers, fathers carrying their baby, and what they want are goods of basic necessities, hygiene kits with soap, detergent, razors, diapers for their kids. And they need them because all of them say that they had to leave their houses where they're having normal lives with kids going to school and and suddenly from one day to the next, they had to change city and start from nothing. So my first impression is the invisible impact of all of what the media covers, troop movements and ceasefires and all of that, is having a really very important disruptive impact on the life of many children.
That brings you to my next question in terms of the scale of the humanitarian crisis. That there is an impression, I think, amongst many in Kyiv that the outside world perhaps doesn't yet fully appreciate how major the problems the country is facing are. Would you agree with that?
Totally, because I mean we have some numbers, not enough numbers, but we think that overall, looking at it from the mandate of UNICEF, children, 1.7 million could be affected. And when I say affected because they don't have access to safe water. In my visit, I had a mayor coming that his community was without water for 70 days, no water at all. The kids don't have access to education, schools are closed, so classic situations that you have in other parts of the world are faced by a high number of children, but this is not really reported. The second thing that is invisible is besides this, contrary to other countries, maybe where the displaced families would be gathered in maybe refugee camps or something that would be very visible and that would make the distribution of humanitarian assistance maybe easier, because of the solidarity of the Ukrainian population, these families are absorbed by friends, by relatives, or also taking over apartments of families that have vacated them and that make it clear through internet or other means that they are putting their house at the disposal of these new families. So if you like, the humanitarian and human impact of the situation becomes more invisible than I've seen in other countries.
So in a way that the support they're getting from the local communities is having the effect of masking the scale of the problem.
Well, they're having the effect of providing them shelter, and that's where it stands. So this is where, then the organization of the volunteers, the solidarity of making available clothes, basic needs, and the role that organizations like ourselves need to play is very important. And this is why we need to be very clear that certain basic commodities need to be put into place, and the dialogue that is being initiated with the government about what is their role in the story in terms of proper registration and redesigning, if you like, of the protection system to make sure that the resources available on the national budget are directed to those who need it and construct a Ukraine that is taking care of its own people, starting with its children, is very much now on the front burner.
As a senior international diplomat who's presumably party to discussions that are going on about the human rights crisis here. Do you think that the international community needs to reassess the scale, that they need to move up to a whole new level of perception in terms of what's happening in Ukraine? Do you think they are moving in the right direction?
Well, we need to bring it to a totally different scale of action, not just perception. And I think definitely the understanding that we are facing a humanitarian situation that needs immediate action of the classic kind, re-establishing water systems, purifying water, opening schools, keeping children with their families, as opposed to creating new challenges that would be very difficult, in case children are, let us say, evacuated from A to B and parents are left, and then families can be, separated. So you need to kind of take humanitarian action very quickly. But what's interesting and what could turn this crisis into an opportunity is because the displaced population, mothers, fathers, and their children are, if you like, incorporated in the social fabric of Ukraine, in the host communities. It's a tremendous opportunity for the country to address problems that were there before the crisis in terms of the quality of the water system, the robustness of the immunization program, the knowledge of teachers to deal with beyond writing, mathematics and all of that, psychosocial dimension of teaching, which would be making sure students are perceived as whole individual and not just not just focusing on a few material. All of these very important dimensions of what is in the best interest for children are now on the forefront. So obviously, the international community needs to understand both the scale of the problem, but also the opportunity that this brings us to help Ukraine to be better fit for its children.
You touched there upon the psychological aspect of the problems or the challenges, let's say, that Ukraine is facing. Clearly, we're looking now at the possibility of a whole generation, especially in East Ukraine, but perhaps in the whole country, which is growing up in the shadow of armed conflict, which has become used to the horrors of war, the physical impact of war, and also the psychological impact of the growing up with hate, perhaps to say. Will UNICEF be addressing that specifically in your aid efforts in terms of trying to offer the psychological help that these children will need to make sure we don't lose a generation to this animosity and conflict? We
are. Right from day one, UNICEF opened a hotline where anybody, children themselves, parents could call to report what they were seeing and sharing their fears, anxiety, and get counseling online through that hotline. Quickly, we realized that this was not enough, and in the school that I visited yesterday, I was able to dialogue with a group of children, 12 to 14, exactly about that. Now, the first striking thing is all of this was in Slovyansk, and they were in a school, mind you, that had been shelled, and half of it had been destroyed already, if you like, rebuilt by the municipality paying for private citizens' work, so perfect partnership. And the children, all of them, whether or not they had, wherever they were living, and they were not in the school when the shelling happened, all of them reported how this entire situation had affected them. Some of them reported that they could not sleep. Some of them reported that they were anxious when they were leaving their homes. Some of them were, through drawings, showing those who had seen tanks coming and bombs and, So first, the tremendous impact that a situation like that has on children. Sometimes we just assess impact of war by number of deaths and casualties, physical, and we don't assess the tremendous impact it has on people's minds and hearts and their feeling of insecurity. Now, the interesting part about this work that we are doing with the Ministry of Education, the school system, and this particular municipality is to introduce using the school psychologist. All schools in Ukraine have a school psychologist who was, I understand, until now more focusing on particular individual situations, in a strictly defined psychological support, to turn them into psychosocial activists and counselors that can really first get the kids to tell that story, which I've just shared with you, but then move to the next level in terms of regaining a sense of hope and that things could be different by participating in different activities. And it was striking to see the drawings of the first months, grey, arms, this, that, moving in a very short time, more colors, talking about hope, talking about the Ukraine they want. And in the dialogue with kids, they were all projecting friendship, peace, working together. And in that school, they had kind of a significant number of IDP children, so children from other communities that had been incorporated. And in fact, yesterday, a new girl had just arrived, and she was immediately made a seat. We were sitting around in circle. A place was made for her by the kids. Welcome to the group, and join the activity. So I'm both coming back with a sense of the impact on children that this crisis has, but also the tremendous resilience that children have if we work with them as responsible adults to give them that sense of hope. So definitely, it's very true that we need to invest in children to not replicate the sins of their adult, the adults that were in charge of this, of our world, when this is all happening, but investing in creating that sense of solidarity, hope, and accountability. And I must say that the visit, to me, showed the tremendous potential that the volunteer, the civil society, are putting into this situation, wanting to create a better future.
Well, this is actually the next point I wanted to ask you about, is this volunteer spirit that over the last year, partly out of necessity for the Ukrainian government, was unable to meet the demands that have been placed on it to an extent, but there has been a great upsurge in volunteer activity, in activists coming together in different communities. Did the scale of that surprise you, and will that play a role in your proposals going down the line in terms of what UNICEF will be doing? Will you be working with these groups?
Totally. I mean, it surprised me, and I think that the scale is surprising, but also the professionalism. All of these citizens groups were monitoring with their little Excel spreadsheet, names of family, who received what. When I was there, a mother came and asked for the same kit she'd received 3 days before, and they said, no, look at the line, all of these other families don't have, and she was arguing, and this was run like a serious business. This is not whatever charity doling out things, monitoring systems, standards, and very clear feedback to the official authorities about their numbers of people, who needed what, expectations of the municipality, and slight pressure, as you said, that the government should be not necessarily doing this, because I think civil society in this country is showing that it is capable of being a part of the social protection system, but that the government must play its part, including on the allocation of resources, and that they are now expected to do so. So yes, as far as UNICEF is concerned, we very much intend to work with government, and I felt very welcome during my visit to put in place the legislative framework, to make suggestions on the use of the national budget, to establish priority, because we continue to state very clearly that investing in children is not just good for the children, it's good for the children, for the family, and for the country, because that is the best, not only ethical thing you can do, but the smartest thing you can do for any money you have in terms of a social investment. So we shall remind the government that they are the accountable duty bearer, but we absolutely will recommend that a proper space is made in the society to maximize and recognize and facilitate the contribution from citizens and civil society.
Now, Ukraine at the moment is still in the headlines internationally. It varies perhaps from week to week, depending on what's happening on the front lines in terms of the conflict. But there is a concern that as time goes by, as the news cycle moves elsewhere, where there's new conflicts, new crises around the world, the international aid focus may also shift. Can you give us some idea about your long-term vision for the work of UNICEF in the post-crisis environment in Ukraine, how committed you can be long-term, and any sort of assurances you could offer that Ukraine will remain a priority for UNICEF?
Well, we've been here 18 years and we're not going anywhere. That's statement number one. Statement number two, what this crisis shows us is that we may have underestimated the challenges of, if you like, the regular program engagement. And that we need now to be much more systematic and thorough about helping Ukraine be fit for its children. So the emergency is creating the need for urgent humanitarian action to take care of people who are displaced, sort out the current drama. But it definitely brings to us the need for keeping that sense of urgency in everything we do, including, if you like, the more normative, the more systems building role that we are playing in this country, and that we need to continue to play until it's up to standards that one would expect for a country in my region, Europe and Central Asia. What I think is, so for sure we are at the moment committed to dramatically scale up our presence in the country and have more colleagues out there in the East, in a number of cities where, if you like, the immediate humanitarian response is needed. But we see this as an investment to feed in knowledge from the grassroots to inform the policy setting, the systems building and the reform agenda that I see Ukraine embarking on. And that is not going to be easy or short term, but if we manage to learn from the crisis what tangible first steps must be taken so that overall the health system, the education system, the social protection system in this country gets strong, well coordinated, efficient use of the resources we have, how little or how big, so that we get maximum return for all children, we will be in a much better place. So our commitment is to considerably scale up now for the humanitarian and strengthen our engagement in the long term for a Ukraine better fit for its children.
Can we talk in terms of numbers? Is it going to be a doubling of the size of the office, or is it too difficult to put a specific figure
right
on it?
Now we move from 25 to 60, and the extent of the length, let's say, of this growth at the moment cannot be stated, because the more we are successful in making the Ukraine, its government and its people put in place the systems that will ensure that the country can take care of its children, then we take more a role of advisor, of bringing international expertise from outside, if you like, and we may need less people on site. But it's also dependent the extent to which the use of the national budget can be made more effective. And we think there's tremendous area of growth there, let alone growing, but of the money that's available, a lot more can be done. So as long as we are needed to help that process move forward, moving from an aid modality, as you stated, to a partnership modality, where we will be Ukraine's partner after things calm down, to continue an agenda where all the rights of all of its children will be realized, we shall be there ready to do that.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Marie-Pierre. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for your interest.
Thank you.